Welcome to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is the Massachusetts TNC webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers from New England and around the world. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm Massachusetts State Director and your hostess for the day, Deb Markowitz. And we're going to be talking today about the importance of soil health for protecting our waters and our food supply, and as well for addressing climate change. We're going to hear from Renée Vassilos. She's the Nature Conservancy's Director of Agriculture Innovation. Renee's going to tell us about TNC's investments in cutting-edge technologies that have the potential to scale our ability to rebuild soil health, which is key to all of this. And I just have to say personally, we're so lucky to have Renee on our team. She is, as you can see, brilliant. And she's also, and that wasn't actually in my formal remarks, but I have to tell you all, she really is. She's an agricultural economist. And as you're going to hear, she's responsible for managing TNC's investments in companies that will help scale regenerative agriculture production practices. Prior to joining the Nature Conservancy, Renee spent nearly a decade at John Deere. And for those of you who aren't in rural areas, they're the ones who make all that fun equipment that help run our farms, the big yellow machines. And they're not just yellow anymore, but they used to be. She spent several of those years based actually in Beijing. So she's worked thinking globally about technology that we use in agriculture. She then founded and managed Banyan Innovation Group, an agribusiness consultancy that advised growth stage agriculture technology startups, and then provided due diligence for investors, meaning told investors if she, using her expertise, thought it was a safe investment or not. Renee's going to present to us for about 15 minutes, and then she's going to take your questions. And so as you think of questions for Renee, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I just want to thank you all for joining us again, and a special thanks to you, Renee. And why don't I pass it to you?
Great. Thank you very much, Deb. I am going to start my timer because, as you all will shortly see, I am extremely passionate about this subject and could talk all day, but as Deb highlighted, this is an incredible group that's listening. And so I'm actually really excited to get your questions and feedback and response to what we're doing. So 15 minutes is what I've given myself, and then I can't wait to hear your questions. The other exciting news is that this work is hot off the press. This is the first time that I'm talking about it publicly. We released the press release on the investments on Tuesday morning. Yeah, so it's just thrilling for me to kind of finally be able to get this out in the world. And thank you for being my first audience. As Deb mentioned, I am the Director of Agriculture Innovation, and I'm managing a pool of venture capital that the Nature Conservancy has put together specifically geared towards moving the needle on our soil health goals. So a little bigger picture, the Nature Conservancy has three key priorities. I suspect many of you are aware: tackling climate change, protecting land and water, and providing food and water sustainably. My work technically falls under that provide food and water sustainably, but as Deb rightly indicated, agriculture has an incredible impact on all three of those priorities. So from a food systems perspective, as we look at what our role can be in ensuring sustainable agriculture production for decades to come, that also is, of course, ensuring our food supply. On the water side, agriculture has a tremendous footprint and impact on water systems across the globe. And so as we imagine improving how we're actually managing production at scale, an impact there is certainly a positive impact there, and critical impact is in fact on water systems. And then lastly, a growing body of evidence exists. Well, we know actually that that agriculture production has a tremendous greenhouse gas emissions footprint, but what we're learning is also the tremendous potential to sequester carbon through soil. And so, and other activities on the farm, also through agroforestry solutions and any number of, quite a bit around farming systems. And so as you see, agriculture is critical across all three priorities and touches all of you every day. And so as I mentioned, I'm currently working in support of our North American agriculture team. We have a very audacious goal to move the needle on 50% of US cropland towards adaptive soil health systems by 2025. And we did a robust, so we set this target in 2016. We did a robust review in 2019, and we were at less than 10% of acres at that time. And so what we recognized was that we were not moving fast enough, and that there was a tremendous need to think differently about how we could actually reach that goal. So I'll step back one moment and just say, what is an adaptive soil health system? Well, 4 critical components of this adaptive soil health system. And this isn't to say that every farming operation must do all of these, or that it even makes sense for them to do them all. It depends very much on geography, where you're sitting, soil types, climate or weather conditions in a particular year can have a significant impact on whether or not you're able to do the practices. But we do know, and again, we have a science team that's been working to understand how we should be building soil health. And these are the 4 critical practices that we focus on. It's increasing acres under cover crop, which is the idea that the soil is a living being, right? It's a thriving ecosystem of itself. And the idea of cover crops is that you never want to have a naked ecosystem. So you want to keep it covered and keep it feeding and the ability to keep thriving. The other one is increasing acres under minimal till or no till. And this again is the idea that the soil is an ecosystem, and the minimal disturbance, the better. The third is crop rotation. So this is the idea that if you're only planting 1 or 2 crops every year continuously, that's not great for this thriving ecosystem. It thrives on diversity. And so the idea that you would actually be introducing more rotations. And then the fourth is input optimization. And this is critical actually across the board, but it's really being laser focused on ensuring that what you're putting on the farm, so in your operation, from a fertilizer, herbicide, pesticide perspective, and irrigation perspective, are all optimized. So thinking about farm profitability, productivity, but are also the environmental impact. And luckily, most often, all 3 of those things actually work in tandem. So how are we getting about this? We have a tremendous boots on the ground team, and Deb and your team host wonderful webinars. So you've actually gotten to hear from some other brilliant colleagues of mine, but also on the North American agriculture team. And then in many critical agriculture production states, we have team members that are boots on the ground. And we have scientists that have been working to build out the agronomic case for shifting towards these practices. We have a team that works to build the economic case for shifting. And then we have a brilliant team that works on the policy side, which has a tremendous impact for agriculture production. But what we recognized is that despite all of those efforts, we're just not moving fast enough, and that there's a critical need for solutions that can accelerate the adoption of regenerative agriculture practices while delivering economic value and positive environmental impact. And the way we looked at it was a creative team within the Nature Conservancy thought about, okay, how can we use capital? How can we use a form of capital to catalyze innovation? And that's what I was brought in to do. So I've been on the team for about 18 months. And the idea was, how can we underlie all of these efforts and support it with technology and innovation solutions to get to that audacious goal? And one of the critical ways we decided on it was to take a seat at the venture investing table. We were just lamenting, for those that joined right on time, actually. Well, it's been a year, so it's been a lonely table. I chose this picture because I'm at the table, but it's been alone and virtual, but we're there. And why? So why this? Why the Nature Conservancy? One is our rooting in science. So the understanding that our investment thesis is based on the idea or on the science that suggests that scaling these practices is the cornerstone and the building blocks to moving the needle on soil health. It's also the ecosystem that I just referenced. We have an incredible team on the ground that could help the technologies that we're investing in by collaborating and supporting the scaling of their solutions. And then it's the tremendous trusted relationships that the Nature Conservancy has. So again, it's been 18 months and I'm continually just blown away by the positive reputation that the Nature Conservancy has externally, which is critical for scaling the investments that we're making and the influence that we're looking to make. Because while, of course, for companies that we're investing in, we are looking for success. But beyond that, we're also looking to influence the space more broadly and to highlight the fact that we believe the urgency is so great that we need to be looking at technology solutions and innovation to get towards our goal. And so it is this trusted relationships that can help us around that influence side and potentially to catalyze additional capital and awareness and influence in this space to scale the solutions that we believe will have the impact that's needed. And then why venture capital? So for those in the audience, venture capital is a type of private equity, if you're not familiar. Investments are typically very high risk because you are supporting these solutions in the very beginning of their development. So you're actually backing companies that maybe don't have a product that's literally in the market yet, it's still being developed. And so it's a high risk, high potential reward investment opportunity. So seems a bit strange for the reputation building Nature Conservancy that all of you are familiar with, but there's a few critical reasons that we chose this space. One is that smaller check size have an influence. So again, it is early stage companies and they're building their businesses, so smaller checks can have an impact. Also, these companies are influenceable. So they are in the process of designing their solutions, and we can leverage the knowledge and team members that we have to influence and design the products that are being developed. And then also, it's something that as Deb mentioned, before I joined the Nature Conservancy, I was working directly with startups, and I was every day blown away by the passion and energy the entrepreneurs and the team members that work in these startups are around innovation and their relentless pursuit of impacting and disrupting the status quo. And again, as we look at the audacious goal that we have, it is in fact this innovation and relentless pursuit of change that's needed to get us where we're trying to go. So high risk, potential reward, why are we doing this? Well, besides the idea that some of these companies will be successful and have introduced solutions that will move the needle, there's also there's other work at play, and I share an example here. It's that these startup community businesses actually have an outsized influence on the industry as a whole. So while the dollars that are going into the industry are smaller than, say, the R&D budgets of John Deere, who I used to work for, or other forms of private equity investment, they're dwarfed by the other investor activity, but the influence actually is outsized. And an example that I share here is Indigo Ag, which is a company based in, I think they were in Cambridge, but now I think they're based in Boston. And they really started 3 or 4 years ago with aggressive and positive language about putting the farmer first. And it really seriously impacted how the major players that have been in business for over 100 years were talking about their work. And in fact, one specific collaboration that I share is that Cargill and ADM, which are commodity trading companies, the largest commodity trading companies, actually collaborated. I mean, for those of us in the industry, we saw this announcement and almost fell out of our chairs because it was so surprising to see this collaboration. And it was, they introduced a tool for farmers around marketing their grain, and it just hadn't been seen before. And this is the type of influence that startups can have that's outsized. So what's our progress? Now I get to talk about the startups. Well, hopefully we've set the stage. We have invested in 5 companies to date. And with this current project, I have room to invest in 4 to 5 additional companies. I'll walk through each of them and just talk a little bit about why we believe they're so impactful. So Growers Edge is based in Iowa. It's a financial technology company. They have designed warranties as a way to de-risk the adoption of new technologies or practices. So we actually have a team that's working with Growers Edge to design warranty solutions for a farmer to de-risk the adoption of the practices that we highlighted. Swarm Farm Robotics I think I heard some John Deere colleagues might be here. Rest assured, my passion for equipment remains very strong. So I'm thrilled to say that one of my initial investments is in an autonomous tractor company. This might not look like the robots you imagined, but this is a critical solution for the input optimization piece that we talked about. So farmers need to, when we talk about input optimization, one of the challenges is to actually have the tools to practice precision agriculture, to actually only apply what is needed when it's needed in a cost-effective way. So what this company is doing, they're based in Australia, and they are designing a piece of equipment that makes it affordable and effective to precision apply herbicides. Their initial focus is on herbicides and nutrient management. So precision apply fertilizers and herbicides. It's critical and very exciting. Stony Creek Colors is founded by a brilliant woman who recognized the need to develop the market for natural dyes. And the first dye that she's starting with is indigo, which is a legume variety crop. And she's developed this business from seed genetics all the way through the processing technology for the leaf. And she's built the actual market with denim mills in Asia. So what this is a rotation opportunity. So I mentioned that it's important that we're not just planting the same crops year after year. So what she's developing is a soil health building legume variety cash crop, which is very exciting. Pattern Ag is a Silicon Valley based soil health analysis company that is, they're doing a lot of things, so I'll boil it down into their current focus, which is doing the soil analysis around the most significant pest and disease pressures that corn and soybean farmers face. And the idea here is that if they can properly analyze the pressures, farmers will have the information that they need to optimize their inputs. So this is, again, getting back to that input optimization, ensuring that you're only using what is required when it's required. And then lastly, Kula Bio, which is a company right here in Somerville, Massachusetts. This is the earliest stage company that we've invested in. So they're a very early stage developing this technology, but they believe that they have a viable alternative to synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, which could be an absolute game changer, again, around the inputs and also for water system impact, because they believe their solution will really mitigate runoff. So these are the 5 companies. And as we look to the future, of course, the work continues. So there's still more investing that we'll be doing. And then we'll also be looking globally. So this is our focus today. So we're looking at North America and really supporting this specific North American soil health building goal. And then in the future, we will be looking at foodscapes across the globe and trying to understand what form of catalytic capital makes sense in those particular markets to help them scale their goals. So thank you. That is my presentation. Not quite 15 minutes, but
I think you did a great job there. Thank you. Really, this is a different kind of conversation than we've had in the past. And let me just lodge it in sort of the approach that I find is so exciting and important that TNC takes to our work. So, as you all know, we're thinking about the problems of the world from a global perspective, and then we're acting locally, right? We're acting on the ground. We're learning from the things we do on the ground, and then it informs our global priorities and the way we have this great back and forth. So we think at scale of the planet, but then we're acting locally. Whatever we do, it's based in science, right? And then we look at what are the levers to scale impact. And, as you know, I come from government, I'm a regulator. I was the head of a regulatory agency most of my career. So I know the power of regulation to scale solutions, but truly markets also scale solutions. And I think one of the things that is so interesting about this project is, not only do we need finance, right? We need money, public money and private investment to actually be able to bring to scale solutions. But we actually also need the solutions. We can have a lot of science that tells us what we need to do. And unless we have the engineers, unless we have a company that's willing to develop and bring a product to market that meets that goal, we're not going to accomplish our goal. And of course, TNC is not in the position of engineering these and producing them and selling, right? So we have to partner with these startups. And so I think it's brilliant. I know when I first heard about it, I thought, why is TNC doing this? And I see exactly why and where this is so powerful potentially. And the ag space is a space that is ripe for this approach. So I hope you're all listening and as enthusiastic as I am as thinking about how do we act as catalysts for some of those technological solutions that need to be in place for us to achieve this really important goal of soil health. So we're going to dive into questions from the audience. We've got a whole bunch now. And I just want to remind you that if you think of a question for Renée, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And so first, a quick one, the question is, are these concessionary investment deals? Why don't you describe what that is? And, I think people are interested in knowing, are we, what are we concerned about most? Impact or return on investment?
Yeah. So what we chose, so as we looked at this, was that what we're also trying to do, that I touched on a little bit, is influence the industry broadly. And so what we were looking for were companies where their businesses will scale alongside the impacts that we were looking for. So as we identified which of the practices they could support the scaling of, their businesses scaled a lot, we anticipate their businesses will scale alongside the impact. So that's how we are looking at it. They're not concessionary. So these are, we are investing in the venture rounds alongside other investors. We actually invest through a venture fund in St. Louis, iSelect. So we literally are coming in alongside their other investors, typically in the Series A round of investment.
And that means early on.
That means early on. So yes, so typically, well, there's everyone says typical, and then you could see lots of different things, but in typical, you would have a pre-seed round of investment, and then a Series A round of investment, Series B, and potentially on and on. So yes, Series A is very early.
And so what's the source of the capital? We have a question, from John on this. What's the source of our capital for this?
So we received a recoverable grant from a generous donor that was really passionate about seeing putting this actually into practice, kind of creating or using capital, and what Deb just articulated, having the Nature to use its knowledge and footprint to support the solutions that will scale the practices we know have to happen. So it was a brainchild of a very generous donor.
That's great. That's great. So we've got these private donors. I mean, that's basically TNC is so lucky to have so many people who are passionate about our work. And so there's somebody who's also thinking about what are the levers, what are the things that are holding us back from impact, and this is an area where we can see, can we make a difference? So, you spent a lot of time with John Deere, and I know in your intro I said those big yellow, but they're green with the yellow deer. Isn't that right? On the field.
That's
So
right.
I'm thinking about the yellow for the deer, but it's those fun, I remember when my son was little, that was the best thing in the world, is to sit on the tractors during farmers night or whatever. So how does your experience with John Deere and living in China even inform your investment work today?
So I think, and you touched on it a little, and we haven't necessarily seen it with this initial portfolio. One of the companies coming out of Australia, but it's the idea that, well, in particular, US agriculture is really distorted because of subsidies. You mentioned policy. Policy is absolutely critical when it comes to agriculture, and is currently quite a severe headwind to progress. But the work we're trying to do is build up kind of should it shift into a tailwind, are we ready? And are there solutions to support shifts on farm? But I believe that, well, certainly my time with John Deere was just incredible, because I was able to get both experience on the product development and strategy side, and then also sales and marketing. So that business lens, like that complete business lens, has been instrumental as I do diligence on companies. It's absolutely critical. And then the global opportunities that I had give me, I think, a unique perspective, in particular, again, to just kind of recognize that maybe some of the most important solutions won't actually be based in the US. So again, Australia, I'll just use the tractor example, is kind of a canary in a coal mine when it comes to the pressures that we'll be facing. So they face severe herbicide resistance and a lot of government pressure around nutrient management because of the impact farming has had on the Great Barrier Reef. And so they have to solve these problems. And so the innovation is coming out of Australia because they're facing the problems and must solve them. And so, that's just one example, but we can imagine similar examples can emerge from other areas.
Yeah, it seems to me that because of your role in John Deere, you really understand you're realistic about the challenges that are facing our agro businesses and what is now the industry of agriculture. And I know there'll be some people who are listening who say, hey, but shouldn't we just go to all small farms? And let me say, the challenge of feeding the world. So I would say yes, that's the utopian vision. But meanwhile, we've got to feed the world. And so the fact of having these large scale farming operations that require investments in equipment so that we can feed the world without destroying it is going to be critical. I know there's a question that's come in from David Miller that I really appreciate, which is, David notes that, this type of investment is important, no question, but he's grappling, is this a Nature Conservancy activity? Is there been, how much resources are we committing? Is there a time frame to assess results? And let me say, from my perspective and what I understand from you, is that this really is an experiment. Like, this is a lever we haven't pulled before. And you've got this donor who's very innovative, who wants to help. And so the answer right now is this is a pilot project, and we'll see how it goes. Is that correct?
That is correct. And well, I do just turn back to the urgency around the need to drive change. And when we consider that there's been a team that's been working on this dedicated since 2016, and we're just not moving the needle fast enough. And the idea that we might be able to use technology and innovation to help us reach our goal. But yes, Deb, you're absolutely right. And David, your question, I would say we don't know yet if this is, so I wouldn't say that this is, going to be something that every team within the Nature Conservancy suddenly adopts, but it is a very specific problem that we were using this form of catalytic capital to see if we can move the needle on the goal.
Yeah, and farming is not unique. When we think about our fisheries, are there, and the challenges of our changing ocean, maybe there's going to be, technological investments that we want to, or technological innovations that we want to catalyze through investment, which is a mouthful, but I think that's really the approach. It's like if we're trying to solve the problem in every other way, but the solutions just aren't on the market for farmers, can we do something about it? And that's one of the benefits of being this global organization, right?
Yes, exactly.
So we have a question from an old friend, Bob Ackerman. So I'm so pleased that you're here with us today. And his question, I would bet other people are thinking about with a successful exit. So assuming that there's success, what do we intend to do with the proceeds? Are we going to reinvest in other ventures? Is this going to be returned to the donor? Like what's the plan?
Yeah, so the principal is returned. So that's the structure of the grant. So the principal is returned. And then there is some flexibility around the returns in terms of how in mission, so align with mission. But to David's earlier point, whether or not this particular project is continuing, we would wait to see, but the work around soil health will certainly continue. So it would be an idea of applying towards continuing to further the soil health goal, maybe not necessarily with venture investments.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. We've got a question from Judy Depew. She wants to know how big a role soil health is to mitigate climate change relative to other strategies like renewable energy development. And I'll tell you, so the IPCC came out with a report now. It was a few years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. And they're the international body of scientists that are looking at climate change and climate solutions. And they basically said, we are not solving the climate crisis unless we are also addressing forest health and soil health. And forest health both and soil health are similar in that they provide, as you said early on, both the carbon sink, right? They continue to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and they hold it. So it is, we're not going to, it's right now, there's such a crisis, it's everything, right? All of the above, and it's important. Is that your perspective? Do you have more information on that?
Yeah, I would say we will have to be making moves in every area. And so, and then again, the one thing I would just say around agriculture is just the unique factor is like the huge opportunity to reduce emissions is also tremendous within agriculture. So I guess, yeah, I think, Deb, I don't know how I would compare because we really will have to be working in every sector. And agriculture just plays an important role, both from the emissions and the potential carbon sequestration side. Yeah, it's absolutely fundamental.
So we have another question from Rachel Greenberger. Is the hope that the 5 portfolio companies will directly collaborate with one another, or is it simply about having handprints in 5 critical arenas: finance, fertilizer, precision, crop diversity, robotics, et cetera? Like do you have a strategy around this?
Yeah, so we suspect there will actually be collaboration amongst the portfolio companies. Actually, that's kind of some of the opportunity, but really it is to highlight for kind of the broader investor community the opportunities that exist to not only back something with potential significant returns, but also that has impact. So it's kind of a multifaceted objective here. Is of course helping these companies thrive, potentially supporting their collaboration and their collaboration with our internal teams, but then also thinking about how this potential portfolio and kind of the urgency that the Nature Conservancy has put around highlighting the need for innovation and technology to get to our goals, and the influence that that might have within the broader investment community.
Yeah, so it really will catalyze more innovation and investment, ideally.
That is the hope. Yeah.
And so Chris Neal asks a good question that probably other people are thinking about. It's like, this is all well and good, but are we going to be looking on, are we going to be validating the practices to make sure they're actually achieving the results we're looking for? And he's specifically asking, with respect to carbon storage, for example. So are we, do we have due diligence around that?
So it's very, that space is complicated, and actually nobody has really figured it out. I mean, it's literally alive and well, the conversation around how to monitor for carbon sequestration and the quantification. That's why what we're laser focused on is whether or not the carbon markets shake out, we do know, and this is why we are laser focused on the practices that build soil health. We know that if we can scale these practices, they have a positive impact on building soil health. So that's where we are very focused. Ultimately, the hope is that some of the efforts will in fact support increased carbon sequestration. But because that is very challenging, and maybe why he's asking this, like how are you going to figure that out, because it hasn't been figured out yet. What we are focused on, and again, what our agronomic team has identified, is that the scaling of these practices has positive outcomes, and that's what we're focused on.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. So we've got two related questions. One is, thinking about regenerative ag writ large, is TNC focused on this investment strategy only, or are there other aspects of the North American agricultural teamwork that are at play here? And then somebody else asked, how much do we anticipate that these companies would contribute toward the ag team's 2025 goal of adopting adaptive soil health? So
yes,
those relate to each other, I think.
So right now, so there are other, and maybe what they're referencing, we also have a really phenomenal grazing lands team that's working really on moving the needle on grazing lands, which also has a tremendous impact on production acres. Right now, we're focused on supporting the row crop acre goal, but we could imagine, because of course technology and innovative solutions are also needed in this grazing lands space. So I can see possibly in the short term that we would also be looking to support those critical goals. And in terms of how do we think that it will track? So we are investing in the companies that we believe will have a direct impact on that 2025 goal. So that is exactly where our focus is. So if we can support financial technology solutions, literal hardware solutions for farmers to be able to be implementing an adaptive soil health systems, that's direct connection with that goal.
Yeah. And so for folks who may not be in the weeds on the work of TNC, we do have a whole group of folks in North America and really around the world who are thinking about sustainable food. They're thinking about how, healthy land and water, and in that context, how we feed the world. And the focus has been some on precision ag, on row cropping, on all of these like climate smart agricultural approaches, as well as water smart. In so many parts of the world, we're struggling with both clean water, but also enough water. And again, as Renée mentioned early on, this project came about in part because we were not making progress fast enough towards our goals, because the technology, the solutions weren't actually there to help scale action. It's hard to do this field by field. And there was actually a question about that. It was what is our point of leverage to implement changes in cultural practices at the actual field level. The questioner says CCAs and the extension, that's these different, the extension services, play a dominant role in influencing practices. How will we gain buy-in given that it's difficult to monetize sustainability? And that might not be the question for you, the investment person, but maybe you'll
culture cannot, I mean, like, if I had to put a weight on like what's influencing change, policy is like an enormous weight on the scale, and culture would maybe be an equal weight on the scale. And so culture cannot be underweighted in terms of the need to shift culture. But what we've identified is that while is kind of looking at the cultural transformation, there's kind of this arc of cultural transformation that follows the technology adoption curve, right? Like this idea that you have early adopters, and then kind of an early majority and a late majority, right? So there is kind of this arc. And if we really want to drive impact and change, it's critical for folks to be working throughout the arc, but we also need to be focusing on delivering solutions for those that are ready to change today. And so that is what kind of these technologies and solutions are geared towards. It's supporting those that are ready to change today. And they probably fall in that early adopter, early majority category of this arc of change. But again, we do have teams that are working on the ground around cultural change, but we think that in tandem to those efforts, we also need to be bringing supporting solutions that can help the early adopters make changes now. So culture can't be undervalued. It isn't the focus of my work, but it is a focus of the work more broadly.
Yeah, and I think there was another comment or question early on that this is one piece of the pie, right? Unless we have actual solutions that can help farmers in the context of their business, right? They're running a business that's a nature-based business, right? It's relying on the ecosystem services of where they are. Unless we can help them achieve the goals that we believe are really important, it's not going to happen. So they need to realistically be able to deploy technology. And once that happens, those other levers can come into play, like regulation, like financial incentives. But unless there's the equipment that allows them to do the precision application of nitrogen, requiring precision application of nitrogen isn't going to be necessarily practical to require. And so it is a little chicken eggy, to use a an appropriate.
That's exactly how I kind of see it, is that like regulation and policy today is a headwind in some circumstances, but if we're not priming the market to support should those shift to tailwinds, we're not going to be ready to see the impact. And again, we just get to, it's absolutely critical that like the need to move the needle in this space just kind of can't be underestimated for the reasons that we already talked about.
You know what this makes me think about, and I know this isn't agriculture. It reminds me of the conversation about transitioning to electric vehicles. So, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we would say, nah, not going to happen. There's not the technology, the batteries, what inconvenience, who will want to do it? It's because we were thinking about those little golf carts, who wants to drive a golf cart? And then we had Elon Musk come, and he's a controversial character, but he was an innovator who said, yes, we can solve this. We can solve the battery problem. We can solve the problem of technology. And then all of a sudden, like, have you been in a Tesla? It's like it's a whole different disruptive technology. And now every car company, not every, but the ones that, many of the major car companies are saying, hey, we're going to be all electric by 2030 or 20, whatever it is. It changed it just changed culture. And then if you drive one, well, I mean, it's like driving a race car. It's not even a Tesla. My little Nissan Leaf is, was much more powerful than, my Saab. I was a Saab snob for years. And it's, so it's that same idea. If you think in the ag space, it's not so different. If there had not been the Teslas, if there had not been someone out there saying, yes, we can do this, here's a barrier, let's innovate and solve that, we wouldn't be where we are with electric vehicles. And I'm very optimistic about it as, an enduring solution. And incidentally, it ended up solving some other problems too, because that battery, it turns out, helps make wind and solar something that we, can be used in New England, because you can store for those cloudy days. So
yeah, you're exactly right. That's a brilliant example. Yeah, the other space that we'd say, like, to compare to is the energy transition, right? So you touched on it a little bit with the batteries, but we're kind of imagining this food transition, right? So comparing the energy transition, and now we're just in the beginning stages of this food transition, and kind of the ultimate vision we have are really robust, dynamic food systems. But if we don't start innovating today and support those that are ready to change and implement the practices we know are critical, we'll never realize that vision of regenerative, organic operations across the globe. But that, that is ultimately where we're looking to go. But we've got to start somewhere. And that's kind of the imperative here, is to think about exactly how can we support, because these innovations are going to happen whether we're there or not. And if we can be sitting at the table and putting an impact filter on what is getting funded and the innovations that are coming through, that can have really critical ripple effects. And so this kind of gets to, you try to put down the presentation, but there are multiple goals, right, with this work. And so one of them is kind of influencing the space more broadly as to what's getting funded, not only capital coming, but what is getting funded. And if we could influence an introduction of an impact filter on more companies, that could have a tremendous impact.
So I'm just scrolling through some of the questions. I see the time. We're not going to be able to get to everything. I apologize to folks in advance. It's wonderful to have so much interest. I wanted to make a point to build on something you had said, which is, I still stick with this question about, the role of TNC here as catalyst. And, there are companies like, John Deere that are so iconic, and they're not necessarily, there's not an incentive for them to take a risk like this. Their model's working, they're responding to the need of their customers. And so in your view, is it these small startups that are going to be the Elon Musks, that, because, as like Tesla forced other people to begin to change, and now there's a real culture change within the mainstream of the auto manufacturers. Is that one of the things that you're aiming for here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, so most folks can name between 5 and 10 car companies, most likely. So there's competition in the car space, but I would say the situation is even more dire in agriculture because there's very little competition. We've seen more consolidation of companies. And when we think specifically about equipment, there are 2 companies that own a vast majority of the market share. So their incentive for innovation is very low because they don't, just as you articulated, Deb, they don't have to innovate. And so that to me is even more of a reason that we have to start influencing and fostering entrepreneurs and startups early days to create that competitive pressure for this very uncompetitive space. So I would say You're exactly right to share that example, but the urgency for it is even greater in agriculture because there is so little competition amongst the industry incumbents, and that actually holds across the entire value chain. So
Oh,
we
that's
just talked about
interesting.
equipment, but
Yep.
it's also true from the seed side. So you have we've had quite significant consolidation in the seed space. You have it on the post-harvest side. I mentioned Cargill and ADM. There's very few players on the post-harvest side as well. And so that lack of competition holds throughout the value chain. And so the need for this innovation and disruption and pressure, the development of this pressure is acute in agriculture.
Yeah. So as part of this project, is TNC supporting the research and development activities of the firms it's investing in or hope to invest in?
So we're not like directly involved in research and development, but where there is application for our boots on the ground team to help, say, design, say, for example, with Pattern Ag, a soil health offering for their soil health analysis platform, that is something that we're looking to support. So it's not necessarily a direct engagement in R&D, and it depends very much on the company and what stage the company is. But we do anticipate that there will be opportunities for collaboration, is maybe more the word that I would use.
Yeah. We had a couple of questions about Kula Bio, and one was that Kula Bio emphasizes that their technology is non-GMO. Do investors prefer non-GMO biotechnologies for soil health and application? Is TNC focusing in particular on non-GMO intentionally versus sort of GMO solutions?
That is probably, there's a reputational, the question exists because there's reputational issues around genetic modification. In this particular case, the reason they're calling it out is because their biggest competitor is Pivot Bio, and they are a genetically modified, and again, I don't want to use the wrong science term, but they have a genetically modified solution. So I believe they're calling it out specifically to distinguish themselves from one of their competitors. Yeah. So that's.
Yeah. So, and I don't know enough about the details of our larger program on sustainable ag and whether or not GMO, non-GMO comes to play. I would imagine, though, insofar as GMO crops often require more inputs, particularly herbicide inputs, that it's that's something that we do work on. We do think about that. So I want to know personally, what excites you about the future of this work?
I think some of the audience question, which I so appreciate, it is so unique that the Nature Conservancy put this program together and is thinking about how to catalyze impact. So what excites me about the work is just that this job exists and that I got to have it is just a complete thrill. And that I am sitting in a position where I care very much about the advancement of this space, and I can sit at the investor table with an impact filter and have that influence is literally a dream job. And so what excites me is that this work will continue, so not in perpetuity, but it will continue, and we will continue to be able to sit in this space and influence early stage companies and capital. I think for some of the reasons that we touched on, and thank you for the great questions because they kind of brought them out, but it's really important. It's really needed in this space in particular to be starting to foster this innovation and creativity and disruption in agriculture. And so again, the idea that, I have a seat at this table and get to play a role, however tiny, is incredibly exciting.
Well, that's great. And it's been exciting, I think, for all of us to hear about this work, really different than the ordinary TNC, portfolio of projects. How can people stay up to date with your work, and where can they follow you? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, Deb and I actually are gonna host a clubhouse tomorrow. So if you want to continue the conversation, we're hosting a clubhouse room tomorrow at 12. My handle there is Vassilos R. You could follow me on Twitter, Vassilos A. Had to get creative because all the names are taken. And then also I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well. So any updates on the program, I'll be sharing pretty actively through Twitter and LinkedIn. And I just want to say thank you, Deb, for giving me the opportunity to share this. As I started with, you're my first audience to get to share, and I am very passionate about this. So I'm so grateful to have the chance to talk about it and get feedback on what we're doing. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It really an exciting presentation. Thank you for joining us today. And I just want to thank everyone who tuned in for your support of the Nature Conservancy. It's your support that makes all of this work possible. We'll be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days with links to the resources we talked about today and a recording of this webinar. If you're enjoying these webinars, please share them with your friends or make a donation to support our work. You can donate via the link in the chat. And you can also follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with our work and to get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with us. Please join us next Thursday on March 18th for a conversation about the intersection of art and science with award-winning underwater photographer and TED speaker, Keith Ellensbogen. Keith believes creating intimate, personal connections to nature inspires positive social change and a global understanding of the world around us. And we'll also be joined then by Dr. Brian Helmuth, a professor of marine and environmental science at Northeastern University. Brian's going to share some of climate change's impact on the fish populations in New England. And as always, you can find the latest webinar schedule and register at nature.org/MA webinars. And thank you again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.